Everyone ignored the burned papers in the forest until she whispered one name. They followed her down a narrow path, boots crunching frost-covered pine needles, the forest unusually silent. Lena, no older than 9, moved like she'd been here before, like she was guiding them back to a grave she couldn't unsee. The dogs, Bran and Echo, were tense, ears twitching at sounds Elijah couldn't hear. Under a blackened tree, she dropped to her knees and started digging with bare hands. Ash, melted plastic, fragments of paper curled by fire. A half-charred photo fluttered out. Children, rows of them, numbered, labeled, and one document barely legible, stamped with a strange symbol, EGI. Then Lena spoke. Henry coughed too much. He disappeared. It wasn't just a memory. It was evidence, and someone out there was willing to kill to keep it buried. The snow had been falling for hours, not in flurries but in sheets, thick and disorienting, like someone had torn the sky open and let all the silence of the world pour down at once. Elijah Moore gripped the wheel tighter, the leather of his gloves creaking in the dim orange glow of the dash. The old Ford growled low in protest as it crawled up the narrow road past mile marker 12, the one with the rusted-out bus stop that hadn't served a living soul in over a decade. The world outside the windshield was a blur of white and shadow. Pines leaned under the weight of the storm, their limbs groaning. Wind slashed across the ridgeline and swept down toward the valley like an unseen predator. Elijah knew this road better than most men knew their own front porch. But even he could feel the unease curling beneath his ribs. He shouldn't have come into town. One bag of dog food and a pack of coffee beans hadn't been worth the risk. But sometimes he craved the excuse to be around people without speaking to them. A nod to the cashier. A moment of remembering he still existed. As he neared the turnoff to his land, headlights swept over the broken frame of the old bus shelter. He almost didn't see it. A blur. Just a shift of texture against snow. He hit the brakes. The truck slid sideways, tires catching ice under powder, and came to a groaning stop in a mound of frozen slush. Elijah was already out of the cab, boots crunching deep into the snow, his breath smoking in the air as he crossed the road. The wind slapped him hard, stealing the warmth from his face before he could even speak. And then he saw her, a child. No older than 6, curled on the splintered bench like a ghost someone had forgotten to bury. She wore only thin fleece pajamas, a cartoon rabbit faded across the chest, now soaked and stiff with frost. Her feet were bare. One ankle was blue, twisted unnaturally, and in her arms, 2 dogs, German shepherds both, one larger, looked up as he approached. Eyes the color of ash, wide, unblinking, ancient. "I wasn't supposed to survive," she whispered. Elijah froze. The wind carried her voice away almost as soon as she spoke, but it had been enough. He knelt slowly, hands visible, voice low. "Hey there, my name's Elijah. I'm not here to hurt you, okay? You're freezing. We need to get you warm." She didn't answer, just tightened her arms around the dogs, as if even God himself might try to take them from her. One of the dogs, the bigger one, bared his teeth with a low growl, but the sound came out fractured, not fear, pain. "Easy, buddy," Elijah murmured. "You're hurt. Let me help." He pulled the emergency thermal blanket from inside his coat, unfolding it with slow, deliberate movements. The foil crackled like fire in the hush of snow. The girl flinched. The smaller dog, younger maybe, let out a tiny, pitiful whine. "They're all I had," she said, her voice so soft he barely heard it. Elijah paused. In all his years, in war zones, in body bags, in VA waiting rooms where silence could collapse a man, he'd never heard anything quite like the way she said, "had." He wrapped the blanket around her, dogs and all. She didn't resist. though she didn't help either. Her hands were stiff, fingers red and curled like claws around the dog's fur. With more strength than should have been in that tiny frame, she clung to the blanket as Elijah lifted her, one arm under her knees, the other supporting her back. The bigger dog let out a broken bark, but didn't bite. The smaller one whined and clung to her chest. The cold bit deeper as they crossed the road. Snow stung his face like gravel. Elijah didn't look back at the shelter. Something about the place felt wrong, as if even the snow knew not to fall too hard there. Inside the truck, warmth fought its way through the vents as he laid her across the back seat. The dogs curled into her on instinct. They hadn't stopped shivering. He cranked the heat, reached into the glove box and pulled out a second blanket, old army issue, and layered it over them. The girl stared out the side window, watching the snow blur past like it wasn't real. "What's your name?" he asked gently, pulling the truck back onto the road. "Nothing." He glanced in the mirror. Her lips moved. "Lena," she said finally, her voice barely there. "They said I wasn't supposed to survive, but I did, and now they'll come." The word struck something primal in him, the way soldiers used to whisper warnings before dawn, when they knew the enemy was close. She wasn't wrong. Someone had tried to erase her, and failed. The cabin welcomed them not with warmth, but with silence. Elijah, "Go." Then the door shut, and the hush returned. Inside, the air was bitter, the wood stove cold, the windows frosted over. Elijah moved fast, his movements precise but quiet. He laid the girl and the dogs on the thick sheepskin rug near the hearth, then grabbed the fire-starting kit from the crate beside the stove. The dogs didn't let him near. The bigger one, battered but still fierce, pushed up on one elbow and let out a guttural growl that echoed off the log walls. Teeth bared, not afraid, protective. Elijah didn't push. He knelt just outside their circle and struck the first spark. The flint hissed, then flared, catching the kindling. Within moments, flames licked up through the dry pine, casting amber light against the walls. The warmth came slow, but it came. The girl hadn't moved much since the truck ride. She was still curled tightly around the dogs, arms shaking but locked. Her skin was raw from the cold, her lips pale, but her eyes tracked him now, not with fear, exactly, with calculation, the kind you didn't expect from someone that small. Elijah stripped off his coat, tossed it under the hook by the door, then moved to the sink. He filled a kettle, set it over the fire, and retrieved a can of chicken broth from the shelf. For now she didn't need food. She needed heat, liquid, quiet. As he worked, he talked softly without demand. "You're safe now," he said, voice low. "This is my home. Built it myself. You don't have to say anything if you don't want. Just rest." The only response was the soft thud of a dog's tail, the smaller one, curled into the girl's ribs. She trembled with every breath, her golden fur sticky with blood and snow, but her eyes were gentle, watchful. The kettle began to hum. Elijah poured some broth into a chipped ceramic bowl and brought it toward the hearth. He knelt, slow, not breaching the invisible line the dogs had drawn. "I've got something warm for them," he murmured. That changed things. The girl's eyes sharpened, not wide, but alert. She reached a hand, hesitant, toward the bowl. Elijah didn't pass it directly. He set it on the rug between them and backed off. The larger dog, the male, darker, older, sniffed it first, then dipped his tongue cautiously. When the girl saw he wasn't reacting, she reached again and nudged the bowl closer, letting both dogs drink. It was the first time Elijah saw her shoulders ease, even slightly. "They got names?" he asked, almost as an barely audible. "She hears when I can't." Elijah understood. There was something sacred in the way she said it, not dramatic, not poetic, just truth. He stood and moved to the small cupboard by the window, retrieving another bowl, this time for her. Chicken broth, plain and steaming. He didn't speak as he brought it over, just placed it within reach and backed away again. Echo sniffed it first. Then, with no growl from Bran, the girl reached forward and lifted the bowl with both hands. Her fingers were still red and cracked, and the ceramic looked heavy against them, but she drank in small, careful sips. The fire grew stronger. Shadows retreated from the cabin corners. And for the first time, Elijah saw her, really saw her. She was thin, painfully so. Her knees poked out beneath the flannel blanket he'd wrapped around her, and her cheekbones were too sharp for a child's face. But her eyes were old. Not aged by time, but by things no child should carry. She finished half the bowl before setting it down. Then she pulled the blanket tighter, her chin barely above the edge. He waited. "You said your name was Elijah," she murmured. "That's right. I'm Lena." She didn't offer a last name. Elijah didn't ask. "I know you're wondering if I'm going to call someone," he said quietly. "The answer is, not yet. Not until you tell me who's looking for you." She didn't speak. Not immediately. She looked at the fire, her lips pressed into a line. Bran shifted beside her, grumbling softly, then dropped his head again. Echo nudged her elbow, like a nudge of courage. "They have eyes that smile," Lena said at last. "But not their mouths. They lied, all of them, even the ones who brought toys." Elijah said nothing, just listened. His hand rested near the fireplace poker, not for protection, but to keep himself grounded. "They gave us names, took them back, gave us new ones." Her voice was steady now, but hollow. "I wasn't supposed to know, but I listened when they whispered. That's why Echo came with me." Elijah leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. "And Bran? He bit one of them when they tried to lock me in the truck. Bran, even half broken, thumped his tail once." Elijah smiled. "Well," he said, "sounds like you made a smart escape." "I didn't escape," she whispered, staring at the flames. "They let me go, because they thought I'd die." Silence fell again. But it was a different kind of silence now, the kind you wrap a wound in, not to ignore it, but to window panes like a thing with teeth. But inside the world had stilled. Lena slept, bundled beneath the thick patchwork quilt she barely stirred. Echo lay curled against her chest, one paw resting lightly on the girl's arm, rising and falling in time with each fragile breath. Bran didn't sleep. He sat upright, eyes open, ears alert, a soldier still at war. The tip of his tail twitched occasionally, but otherwise he was stone. Elijah didn't try to sleep. He sat in the old rocking chair beside the stove, a mug of untouched coffee cooling in his hands, eyes fixed on the flames. His boots were still damp. His shirt clung to his back in places where the sweat hadn't dried. But he didn't move. Something about the way the girl had spoken. They let me go because they thought I'd die. It rang louder in his mind than the storm ever could. He hadn't heard a sentence that hollow since Kandahar. The logs shifted in the stove, casting a sudden flare of orange across Lena's face. In the light, her skin looked too pale, too thin, like something you could crumple with one wrong word. But still she held on, not just to the quilt, but to Echo. Even in sleep, her fingers stayed curled in the dog's fur like a lifeline. And Bran, he hadn't moved since Elijah covered them both. There was loyalty in his posture, not the kind you train, the kind you bleed for. Bran didn't just guard her, he knew what she was. And Elijah recognized it too. He exhaled slowly and let his head lean back against the chair. The ceiling above was dark with old smoke stains and spiderweb cracks, like veins of memory that never healed. It had been 12 years since the accident. 12 winters since his sister Lila sang off-key in the passenger seat of his truck, tapping her boots against the dash, teasing him about not knowing the words to some stupid pop song. He remembered reaching over to turn the dial down. He remembered the flash of black ice, the way the truck spun. The impact hadn't even been the worst part. It was the silence after, the absolute, impossible silence. He'd pulled her out of the wreckage with his hands bleeding, screaming her name into the snow. But her eyes were already glazed. The warmth had gone, not to the storm, to something colder. He hadn't driven that stretch of road since. After that, the Marines made sense. War didn't ask questions. It welcomed the broken. But even there, he hadn't found what he was looking for. He came back with a shoulder full of shrapnel, a scar curling down the side of his face, and a gnawing emptiness that no amount of firewood or isolation had ever filled. Until tonight. Elijah looked at Lena again. She didn't know who he was, didn't know what he'd done. She hadn't asked. But something in the way she watched him, in the way she let him close, had left. He sipped the cold coffee, grimaced. The cabin groaned as the wind pushed against it again. Boards creaked. A soft knock sounded, probably a pine branch hitting the side. Bran's ears perked, but he didn't growl. Echo shifted slightly, snuggling closer into the curve of Lina's belly. A half-smile ghosted across Elijah's lips. It didn't last. He stood, walked to the back wall, and pulled the wool blanket from the peg by the stove. Quiet as he could, he stepped over to the couch, unfolded it, and draped it over them all. Lina, Echo, and even Bran. The big dog didn't move, but his eyes followed the motion. "I'm not gonna take her," Elijah whispered, not sure why he said it out loud. "You don't have to watch me like that." Bran blinked once, then turned his gaze back to the fire. That's when it hit Elijah. Not all at once, but slow, like smoke seeping under a door. This girl had no one left. Whatever she'd escaped, whoever had left her at that broken bus stop in the middle of a snowstorm, hadn't done it by accident. They hadn't just forgotten her. They had expected the cold to finish what they'd started. And the only reason she was alive was because these dogs had stayed, guarded her, walked with her through miles of snow and blood. They hadn't left her behind. And now neither could he. It didn't feel like a decision. It felt like something deeper. Like when a soldier sees the flash of a tripwire and throws their body anyway. Reflex, training, or maybe something else. Something Lila would have called grace. He walked back to the rocking chair, dropped into it with a soft sigh, and rubbed at the scar behind his ear. Snow drifted against the window in erratic patterns, swirling like ghosts that couldn't decide if they were coming or going. Elijah leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "All right, Lina," he said under his breath, watching the flames crackle and dance. "Looks like you're stuck with me." He didn't know what would come next, didn't know who was looking for her, didn't know how long they had before the wrong kind of knock came to that door. But he knew one thing. This girl wasn't dying, not alone, not while he was breathing. And in that moment, under the quiet light of a fire that had outlived so many winters, something that had been frozen for 12 years began, just barely, to thaw. The morning came slow, like it was afraid to wake the house. The snow had stopped sometime during the night, but it left behind a hush so deep it felt unnatural. From the girl, Lena. She was still wrapped in the thick quilt, her small frame barely a bump beneath the heavy folds. Her breathing was steady, and then it wasn't. She stirred like someone surfacing from too far down. "My back." The words were too heavy for a child to carry. Elijah swallowed, nodded once, and stood. "Whenever you're ready." As he turned to reach for the folded clothes in the shelf, his boot nudged something near the couch. A pad of paper, half tucked under her tattered backpack. He bent instinctively to pick it up. That was a mistake. The moment his fingers brushed the paper, Bran erupted. The dog surged forward with a growl that could crack concrete. His hackles rose, teeth bared, blocking the space between Elijah and the girl. Echo barked too once, but it was Bran who stared him down like a threat. Elijah didn't move, hands open, voice calm. Lena had frozen. Her eyes were wide now, but not afraid, wary, measured.
"That's mine,"
she said.
"I didn't know."
Elijah answered gently.
"I draw in it, when I'm not allowed to speak."
The room went quiet again. Even the wind outside had stilled. Bran returned to her side, pressing his weight against her leg. Echo leaned into the other. Elijah crouched slowly, hands on his knees.
"I wasn't going to look. I promise."
She studied him for a long moment. Then, quietly, he sat down again, slower this time. The firelight danced across his face, softening the lines carved by years he never spoke about. "You said that last night," he murmured, "the smiling people." Lena's fingers curled into Bran's fur.
"They have names, but not real ones. Titles. Like you're not a person, you're a function. I was."
She trailed off, then whispered,
"Subject delta. Sometimes just trace."
Elijah said nothing. She picked at the edge of the quilt.
"I heard them say it, that I was going to be cleaned like a stain."
"And you ran," Elijah said.
"No,"
she replied.
"they opened the door. Left it open. On purpose."
She looked at him then, really looked.
"They didn't think I'd survive the woods. I wasn't supposed to."
For a long time no one said anything. Even the dogs didn't move. Elijah exhaled through his nose. "You did survive." She nodded, eyes suddenly glassy.
"Because Bran bit the man who tried to push me back in the van. And Echo followed me when I got to the tree line. She doesn't like blood, but she came anyway."
He looked at the two dogs, sitting like statues, flanking a girl who should have never had to know the taste. Stood at the kitchen counter, chopping strips of dried venison. The rhythmic tap of his knife on the cutting board was the only sound. Behind him, the quiet was almost too still. Then he noticed it. Not silence. Stillness. Bran hadn't moved. Not in the casual way most dogs rest, but with deliberate poise. Body aligned to the door, ears half-perked, eyes open, unmoving, like he was listening to something Elijah couldn't hear. Not noise. Pattern. Bran's muscles didn't twitch with dreams. His tail didn't wag in sleep. He was a sentinel, trained to conserve energy, to watch without revealing he was watching. On the floor near the hearth, Echo twitched in her sleep. But even that had rhythm. Every time Lena shifted under the quilt, Echo adjusted to match. When Lena's breathing hitched, just slightly, Echo's head lifted. When her fingers trembled in half-dream, Echo reached out her paw and pressed it gently to the girl's arm. It was more than instinct. It was protocol. Elijah set down the knife and turned slowly, watching now. Not as a rescuer, not as a soldier, but as a man who had once trained dogs for men, who wore earpieces and didn't blink. Bran tracked him with his eyes, not aggressive, not afraid, but evaluating. "You're not pets," Elijah muttered. Bran didn't move. Echo stirred as Lena let out a small whimper, curling deeper into the quilt. The smaller dog rose on silent paws, stepped over to her, and laid her head across the girl's ribs. Not heavy, just there, anchoring. That was the moment it clicked. Not military. Behavioral programming. The kind designed for search and emotional regulation. K9 therapy models, support-grade service dogs, but with alert parameters, dual-trained, hybrid systems. Bran was tactical, Echo was emotional. Together, they weren't just survivors, they were assigned. But assigned by who? Elijah knelt near the hearth, slowly, easing down like a man lowering himself into old pain. Bran didn't move, didn't growl, just watched. You were someone's. Government, private, doesn't matter. He glanced at Echo. She's not just comfort, is she? She regulates her, tracks stress responses, waits for markers. She probably licks her hand when her heartbeat spikes, nuzzles her chest when she breathes too fast. Bran's head tilted slightly. Not confusion. Acknowledgement. Elijah nodded as if the dog had spoken. I've seen your kind before, but never out here, without sound. Tactile trauma intervention. All of it. Right there. Echo was textbook. Bran was something else. Maybe special forces, or worse, privately enhanced. Elijah closed the case and rubbed his jaw, the scar on his temple itching the way it always did when instinct stirred. There was a story here, bigger than he'd guessed. He glanced at the girl again. Lena had tucked her knees to her chest now. Even asleep, she looked small, like she'd been taught to disappear. These dogs weren't her pets. They were her guards, and maybe her witnesses. He returned to the chair by the stove and sat. In the dim light, he recalled something his sister used to say when they were kids. Dogs don't lie, not even when you want them to. He didn't know why that came back to him now. Maybe because Bran had been speaking without words since the moment he stepped into the cabin. Maybe because Echo had already taken on the role of protector before he'd had the chance to even try. Either way, the message was clear. They hadn't found him by accident. And if someone had trained these dogs, assigned them, then there was a network, a handler, a program. Okay, let's say you're not just lost. Let's say she's the loose end someone forgot to tie, or maybe didn't want to. Heat helped, they'll be looking for you, not just because she's alive, but because you are. Bran's ears twitched, the fire cracked, Echo lifted her head and blinked at him, slow, tired, knowing. And just like that, something shifted inside Elijah again. Not like before. Not like the night she first whispered, "I wasn't supposed to survive." This was different. This was tactical. Now, he wasn't just sheltering a broken girl with haunted eyes. He was hiding evidence. And the evidence had a name, a heartbeat, and two loyal shadows that wouldn't let her fall without taking the world down with her. He whispered the words to himself, words he hadn't said aloud in over a decade. Eyes open, head down. No movement without signal. Bran blinked. Echo lowered her head again. They knew. And Elijah realized, too late to turn back. He was already part of the story. The fire had dimmed again. Just embers now, glowing faintly like coals buried under memory. Elijah didn't relight it. He preferred the quiet. The dark helped him think, helped him watch. Across the room, Lena sat cross-legged on the floor, knees drawn up under the oversized flannel shirt he'd given her, sleeves swallowed past her fingers. A flashlight balanced between her knees, casting a narrow cone of light over the page in her lap. The rest of the cabin was shadows and breath. Bran lay behind her, his chin resting on his. Front paws. Unmoving, except for the occasional flick of an ear. Echo had curled herself into the corner of the rug, closer to the girl than to the flame. It was past midnight, but Lena hadn't spoken of sleep, hadn't asked for food, hadn't even yawned. She drew, obsessively, lines, shapes, arrows. At first, Elijah thought she was doodling, a child's attempt to pass time, find peace. But then he saw the precision in her strokes, the deliberate geometry. The way she'd pause between lines, close her eyes, like she was recalling floor plans in her head. She wasn't guessing. She was remembering. Elijah stood at the edge of the kitchen, one hand resting on the old cedar beam. He watched her without speaking. In the war zones, they used to say memory was the most dangerous weapon, because it didn't come when you called it. It came when you least expected it. And it never came empty-handed. Lena flipped the page, started again. This time, she drew a long, rectangular building. Multiple floors, too many windows, a courtyard in the center. She sketched people, small forms, some seated, some standing. A woman near curtains, a man behind a desk. And on the wall above them, a circular symbol with jagged wings. She didn't write anything for a long time. Then, almost like it hurt, she wrote, Dr. Voss, and beneath it, E.G.I. Elijah's breath caught. She added arrows next. Red and green. Directional, connecting names and symbols, crossing some out. A map of movements, of control, of trafficking. The girl didn't flinch as she drew. Didn't speak. Didn't explain. But her hand shook as she traced one final line from the man's office to a door marked No Exit. She capped the marker. Elijah stepped forward. Lena, he said gently. She didn't look up, just closed the book and held it in her lap like something sacred. or dangerous? Can I see it? She hesitated. Echo stirred. Bran lifted his head. Then, slowly, she handed the notebook over. He took it with care, carried it to the table, turned on the old lantern there. Walk with purpose. He pulled the phone from his coat pocket and scrolled to the only number that mattered tonight. Renee Alvarez. The last time he'd seen her, they were both 20 pounds younger and bleeding in a pickup zone near Kandahar, arguing over who'd take the last evac slot. He'd stayed behind. She'd taken the boy in her arms and limped through gunfire. Now she worked domestic, counter-trafficking intel. The line buzzed once, twice, then a click. "Elijah," came her voice, low, alert. "You alive or just lonely?" He didn't waste time. "I have a girl, 8, maybe younger. Came through a storm with 2 dogs, both canines, highly trained." A pause. "Go on." "She's drawing names, faces, schematics. Memory recall's too accurate for a normal kid. Says she was called Trace. Mentions something called EGI. Another pause. Then quietly, "Irene Global Initiative. You know it?" "I've heard whispers. Shell charity fronts. Movement of unregistered minors across states. Big funding from overseas philanthropy. Nobody's nailed them. Everyone who tries gets sidelined." "She's not a whisper," Elijah said. "She's a witness." Another silence, longer. "I'll run the name Dr. Voss. You got drawings? I'm sending now." He tapped send. The photos uploaded slowly. 1 bar, 2. Then the screen dimmed. "Elijah," Renee said after a moment, "if she's tied to them, they'll come. Not through the front door. Not like amateurs." "I know. You got a fallback?" "I've got a plan." "You always do. Just don't die before I get there." He ended the call without goodbye, looked out at the tree line. Nothing moved. But the cold felt different now. Not just winter. Warning. He went back inside. Lena hadn't moved, but her eyes were open now, staring into the fire. Elijah sat near her, returned the notebook gently. She didn't ask what he did with it. She didn't need to. Instead, she whispered, "They'll know I remembered." He looked at her, really looked, and said the one thing she hadn't heard in a long time. "Then we'll make sure someone listens." The sky was bruised with cloud when they set out, pale light filtering through the pine canopy, like it didn't want to see what lay beneath. Snow flurried gently, drifting sideways with the hush of a world holding its breath. Lena walked ahead. Her steps were silent in the snow, too quiet for a child her size. She moved with purpose, not the urgency of someone fleeing, but the sight of old horror. You didn't speak until the earth gave permission. They crossed the frozen creek bed and veered west. The trees grew thinner there, bent by age and winter. Lena paused near a clearing, shaped like a forgotten wound. Snow refused to gather here, and nothing grew. At the far edge stood a pine tree, blackened, leafless, dead. Its bark curled like burned paper. The base was scorched, and the soil beneath was warped, stained with something darker than ash. It was here she stopped. "There," she whispered, pointing. Elijah stepped beside her. "How do you know?" She didn't answer, just knelt and began to dig with her hands. Bran dropped down beside her, paws pushing snow aside in rhythmic strokes. Echo let out a low whine and circled once, then joined in. Elijah hesitated, then dropped to his knees. They dug in silence. 6 inches in, snow turned to ice. A foot deeper, the soil turned black. Then Bran froze. His nose dipped into the dirt, and he nudged something toward Elijah's hand. A corner of charred paper, brittle and stuck to a melted strip of plastic. Elijah eased it out with gloved fingers. What remained of a laminated ID tag clung to the corner. The photo melted, but the word "intake" still legible, stamped in bold red. Lena said nothing. Her hands were shaking now, but she didn't stop. More paper surfaced. Scorched documents, fused together by heat and time. Elijah sifted gently. Some were beyond saving, others partially intact. A few held lists, names, dates, strange acronyms, all burned along the edges, like someone had tried to erase them in a hurry. Then came the photos. Half melted, but visible. Children, rows of them, lined against cold walls, some looking directly at the camera, others turned away. Each photo bore a sticker on the corner. Colored dots, red, yellow, blue. Color-coded, Elijah muttered. Triage, or ranking. Lena reached into the pit and pulled out something with both hands, a folder warped and half missing. But inside, untouched by fire, were 3 sheets fused at the edge. Elijah took them carefully, unfolded them, medical forms, assessment records, dosage logs. Under program, it read, EGI, Tier 3, Behavioral Transfer, Obedience Testing. The line for Guardian Consent was blank. The signature line bore a stamped name, Dr. Voss. His stomach turned. Behind them, the wind picked up, and snow swirled in eddies across the open scar. Echo stiffened suddenly, nose raised. Bran stood too, his hackles rising. "We're not alone," Elijah whispered. He scanned the trees. No movement, but something had shifted. Bran paced to the edge of the pit, nose to the air. But one boy's face remained, pale, thin, dark curls. A cough caught in the photograph. Frozen. Lena looked up. "That's Henry." Elijah's throat tightened. "Who's Henry?" "He disappeared first," she said. "He coughed too much. They said he couldn't be fixed." Echo whined, nudging her shoulder. Lena tucked the photo into her jacket pocket and stood. She didn't cry, but her hand found Bran's collar, and she gripped it like it was the only thing real in a world where names disappeared faster than snow under fire. As they turned back, Elijah looked one last time at the pit beneath the tree. The earth looked like it had been burned to forget, but it hadn't. It had remembered. And now, so had they. The fire crackled softly inside the cabin, a low chorus of snaps and whispers that tried to warm more than just skin. But it wasn't enough to reach the quiet growing between them. Lena sat on the floor near the hearth, legs tucked under her, shoulders wrapped in Elijah's old army jacket. She didn't ask for it, just slipped into the warmth like she'd been cold for far too long. Her eyes weren't on the fire, though. They were on the folded papers Elijah had pulled from the pit. She hadn't spoken much since they returned, but now she raised a hand and pointed. "That's Henry." Elijah glanced down. The document in his hand was warped but legible in places. The name Henry Blake was typed at the top of a column. Age 7. Condition, delicate bronchial history. Next to that, someone had scrawled in ink, "Flagged for early release." He didn't need to ask what that meant. The way Lena's voice had cracked on the word "was" told him everything. "He coughed too much," she said softly. "They said he ruined the silence. Then one day he just didn't come back from the medical room." Bran, resting with his chin on her thigh, opened one eye at the tone in her voice. Echo shifted closer, brushing her side with quiet reassurance. Elijah's fingers tightened around the paper. It felt like holding a confession written in ash. "He was always nice to the dogs," Lena added, "even when the others weren't. He used to sneak them food from the meal trays. He said Echo reminded him of the dog he used to have, the one before." Elijah said nothing. What could he say? That Henry might have stood a chance if someone had cared sooner. That a name on a burned piece of paper should never have been the only trace left of a life. Instead, he turned back to the document pile they'd brought home. He spread it out carefully on the table, burnt edges, melted plastic, scorched files, and illegal unless you knew what the codes meant. But there was one line near the bottom. 7 youth packages, Tier 2. Pre-cleared for transfer, HF.found, number 579-A. Canada Hub, next to it, EGI/Hope Future Foundation, Partnership Division. Elijah's heart dropped into a slow, cold rhythm. They were moving them. Not just housing, not just testing, transferring. He stood up sharply, pacing toward the kitchen without realizing. His hand trembled slightly as he ran it over his beard. "Son of a—" A low growl stopped him mid-step. Bran. The dog was no longer curled beside Lena. He stood rigid now, ears forward, tail stiff, head tilted toward the window nearest the rear of the cabin. Echo followed, her movements fluid but alert, posture shifting from comfort to defense. Elijah reached slowly for the rifle leaning against the log wall. His fingers found the stock without looking. Outside, the forest was still. Too still. He stepped carefully toward the window, boots silent on the old wood floor. He leaned slightly, careful not to fog the glass with his breath. Snow drifted in slow spirals across the tree line. Nothing moved. No birds, no wind, no peace. Behind him, Lena had stood. She wasn't crying, but her eyes were locked on Bran's reaction, and she held Echo's collar like a rope in deep water. "Elijah," she said, "that's how it starts. The quiet." He turned back, voice low. "You've seen this before?" She nodded. "Before someone disappears, the woods go quiet first, like they know." Bran padded toward the front door and sat, staring at it with a focus so absolute it unnerved even Elijah. Then came the smell. It wasn't strong, just a faint, metallic whiff, but it didn't belong. Gun oil, not the kind Elijah used, the synthetic, tangy type found in standard-issue tactical gear. Whoever it was, they were close, and they were watching. Elijah checked the window again. Still nothing, but that didn't mean anything. He'd learned long ago that the real danger wasn't the thing you could see. It was the one patient enough not to be seen at all. He turned to Lena. "I need you and the dogs to stay here, away from the windows." She didn't argue. She just crouched beside Echo and whispered something only the dog could hear. Echo immediately dropped into a crouch between her and the wall. Bran didn't move. His eyes never left the door. Elijah stepped outside, rifle ready. "Targets." Elijah didn't follow. He turned back. Inside the cabin, Bran was still by the door. "Someone was here," Elijah said as he shut it behind him. "Not anymore, but they were watching." Lena didn't speak. She simply walked to the table, picked up the burned document with Henry's name, and placed it gently on the hearth, like an offering. Then she said, "If they know we know, they'll come faster now." Bran let out one breath through his nose, low and deliberate, like an exhale of warning. Names don't sleep, and neither would they. Inside the cabin, the fire was dying. It popped occasionally, a hollow snap, like bones underfoot in a dream. But the warmth it gave off couldn't reach past the rising unease, now soaking into the walls. Bran hadn't moved from the door. Elijah had tried calling him twice, low, coaxing tones, the kind you use when you want to believe the danger's past. Bran hadn't blinked. The dog's amber eyes locked on the door, as if it were no longer wood and hinges, but a living thing. Echo paced restlessly along the cabin's west wall, each step measured, nose twitching toward the windows. Her ears flicked sharply at each creak, each shifting board of the storm-battered cabin. Lena sat silent on the floor, with her knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped tightly around Echo's blanket. Her gaze darted between the dogs and Elijah, reading their body language like most kids her age would read a fairy tale. Elijah moved to the small table beneath the lantern and opened his gear bag. He didn't need light for what he was looking for. Muscle memory guided him through rows of survival gear until his hand closed around the black pouch of his old field scanner. A relic from his last tour, outdated by modern military standards, but it worked. And sometimes, the old ways were the only ones that told the truth. He flipped it on. The soft whine of the device warming up filled the room. No one moved. Then the screen blinked green. Baseline sweep. Normal. Elijah tapped the scan again. Narrow band, short range. Nothing. Then, a spike. Very faint, but unmistakable. He adjusted the range. The signal narrowed. Stronger. A proximity ping. 3 short pulses, then a chirp. The source was inside the cabin. His stomach dropped. He looked toward Lena. The girl flinched slightly under his stare, not because she was guilty, but because she saw something change in his eyes, the soldier coming forward. "Lena," he said gently, "can I see your coat?" She hesitated, then slowly he took his knife and with a steady hand slit the seam. The fabric gave way, and there it was, a small circular node, matte black, no bigger than a thumbprint, barely visible, embedded into the insulation like it belonged there, a tracker, active. "Jesus," Elijah muttered. Lena's face went pale. "They said the coats were for warmth, but none of us were ever allowed to take them off, even indoors." "They weren't coats," Elijah said. "They were collars. Surreality's day zones. They saw, they heard Doc's even the space once, hissed and flared before cracking in two with a sound too loud for its size." Bran barked once. Echo let out a growl, low in her throat. Not at the sound, but at what it meant. "They know where she is," Elijah said, half to himself. "Not anymore," Lena whispered. "No," Elijah replied, voice tight, "but they did, and they don't lose track of what they think belongs to them." He paced, once, twice, thinking. Every instinct he'd buried since leaving the service roared to life again. This wasn't a cabin anymore, it was a target. "They'll come at night," he muttered. "Fewer variables, fewer witnesses. And if they think the tracker burned out by accident, They'll assume the girl's dead or compromised. They always come at night, Lena said. They think it's cleaner. Elijah turned to her. How long would it take them from the last signal ping? She didn't answer, but her eyes said it. Not long. Bran began to pace now, tail stiff, body alert. Echo joined him near the back window, ears forward. The air had shifted again. It was like watching the sky right before lightning splits it in half. Everything waiting, tense, as if even the snow was holding its breath. Elijah moved to the wall and pulled down an old pack. The emergency kit he hadn't touched in over 2 years. Inside were flare rounds, a med pouch, a field radio, and 2 small plastic cases marked with faded Sharpie. Eyes only. Use if cornered. He looked at the girl. You trust me? Lena nodded. Then tonight, you follow what I say. No questions, no running off. Understand? Yes. Bran let out another low growl. His head turned sharply toward the forest. Echo pressed her body close to Lena, not in fear, in formation. They're not just guarding her, Elijah whispered. They're preparing her. He walked to the door, rifle in hand, and locked the latch. Not that it would matter. Nothing built of wood and nail could keep out the kind of men who hunted by night, with silent mouths and smiling masks. But it was a gesture, a line in the floor. Behind him, Bran let vibration in his throat, like something ancient waking up. Echo followed, her paws silent on the wood, eyes narrowed. Elijah was by the stove, stripping wire from an old radio transmitter. He froze mid-motion. The only people who knew how to get here were dead, retired, or buried so deep in government databases their memories barely existed. A third knock. Then a voice. Mr. Elijah Ward. I'm Vivian Kane. I'm with the North County Trauma Stabilization and Youth Recovery Initiative. May I come in? The words were warm, practiced. But something about them didn't land right. Not just the length of the title, but the way she said it, like she'd rehearsed it in the mirror while practicing different smiles. Lina froze, near the fire. Her hand slowly reached for Bran's neck. She didn't speak, but her fingers curled tight into his fur. Bran didn't move. Elijah walked to the window, just enough to glance past the curtain. She was alone, mid-40s, maybe older, wearing a tailored gray coat, hair in a sleek bun that didn't sway even in the mountain wind. One gloved hand held a clipboard, the other a leather tote. Her boots were spotless, too clean for snow and mud, too deliberate. Elijah unlatched the door but didn't open it all the way. Where'd you say you were from? Vivian smiled, a calm, practiced smile, the kind people wear to funerals they don't care about. North County Trauma Response Initiative. We're a privately funded, state-supported outreach. We received a ping from one of our recovery beacons and were dispatched to check in. We specialize in post-traumatic care for minors with complex needs. Elijah didn't blink. That's a lot of words for an unannounced visit. Her smile didn't fade. We don't like to waste time when a child may be in distress. Behind him, Echo gave a sudden, sharp growl, a sound Elijah had only heard once before, in Kandahar, just before she lunged at a man with a hidden IED beneath his coat. Vivian's eyes flicked toward the sound, her smile strained. I see you have protection. Bran stepped forward, placing himself squarely between Lina and the door. No bark, just presence. Lina still hadn't spoken, but her grip on Bran hadn't loosened. Her whole body was tight, knees drawn in, shoulders rigid. She stared at the woman without blinking. Elijah stepped outside, closing the door behind him with a quiet click. The cold hit like a slap. Vivian didn't flinch. "Mr. Ward, foot inside that cabin." She straightened slightly. The warmth drained from her face, leaving something sharper in its place. "This child is registered with a welfare concern. If you obstruct recovery, I'll be required to notify enforcement." Elijah stepped forward until they stood eye to eye. "You're wearing perfume," he said quietly. "Floral, faint, but wrong for this cold. Your tires are city clean, your boots have no salt marks, and that clipboard hasn't seen a real signature in months. You came prepared for a photo op, not a rescue." Vivian's eyes narrowed. "You're making a mistake." Elijah tilted his head. "I've made plenty. Not today." Behind the door he heard a soft knock. 3 taps. Low. A signal. He turned, opened the door a crack. Lina stood by the curtain, her voice barely more than a breath. "She knows Henry." Elijah's blood chilled. He stepped back inside without a word and shut the door. Vivian Kane remained on the porch, staring at the wood like she could burn through it with thought alone. Inside, Elijah locked the door, then grabbed his go-bag and opened the side pouch. A worn photo, laminated. 3 kids. One of them, unmistakably, Henry, the boy from the burned photo Lina carried. The second, a girl with braids. The third, Vivian Kane, younger but unmistakable. Elijah stared at it for a long moment, then turned to Lina. "You're sure?" Lina just nodded. Bran stood beside her, unmoving, and somewhere outside, the woman in gray walked back to her vehicle. Alone, for now. But the war had changed masks, and this time it wore heels. The storm had thinned into flurries by the time Vivian returned to the porch. No knock this time, just her silhouette behind the foggy pane of the window. Calm, composed, and holding something. A folder. Thin, polished, branded. Elijah opened the door halfway, letting in a sliver of cold air and the scent of something artificial. Lavender and bureaucracy. "I thought we were done," he said flatly. Vivian gave a smile so soft it could slice through silence. "I just wanted to leave you with documentation, so you're not left wondering." She held the folder out like it was a peace offering or a poisoned apple. He took it, but only with his gloved hand. The folder was dark navy, embossed with silver lettering. North County Trauma Initiative, Compassion in Action. Inside, the first page was a familiar trifold brochure. Stock photos of counselors with warm eyes and staged laughter. A list of recovery milestones. Reread it 3 times. Not Department of Child Welfare, not social services, not any agency with an ounce of state oversight. EGI. The same initials Lina had drawn. The same symbol that showed up beside the name Dr. Voss. The same signature Elijah had found half-burned into the scorched edge of a document under the pine tree. A child wasn't being rescued. She was being returned. Vivian noticed the shift in his face, subtle, but she was trained for that. She tilted her head with delicate concern. Is something unclear? He looked up at her, slowly. Regional contractor? Her smile didn't falter. It's standard language. We partner with organizations who specialize in advanced trauma care, private entities with high-capacity resources. These aren't orphanages, Mr. Ward, they're sanctuaries. His eyes didn't leave hers. Why does a sanctuary need a custody clause that strips parental notification rights? Vivian's lips parted, but no words came out. Then, as if remembering her mask, she smoothed her voice. In emergent cases involving psychological threat to self or others, limited guardianship transfer allows us to move faster. For the child's safety. He tapped the line on the form again. EGI Systems Integration isn't a mental health clinic, it's a shell with ties to defense contractors, neural pattern testing, and black site bioethics violations. Her smile broke, not shattered, just a hairline crack at the edge. You've done your reading, she murmured. I've done my surviving, Elijah said. There's a difference. Behind him, Echo padded softly to the doorway. She didn't growl this time, just stood beside him, calm but alert, the way a soldier listens in the moment before a door breaches. Vivian closed her portfolio. The wind lifted strands of her hair across her cheek, but she didn't brush them away. We're not enemies, Mr. Ward. Then stop acting like a ghost with credentials. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Two people used to seeing behind people. And that's when she said it, not with menace, but with a weariness that didn't belong to this cabin or this snow or even this moment. She's one of 17. Elijah's throat tightened. 17 what? He asked. Vivian didn't answer. She turned to leave, her heels sharp against the frozen wood. But just as she stepped off the porch, she looked back over her shoulder. We're not the worst thing that's coming for her, she said quietly, but we may be the last thing that asks. The door closed before the wind could take her voice away. Elijah stood there for a long time, folder still open in his hands. Echo brushed her head against his thigh, rounding him. He looked back at Lena. She hadn't moved from the table, but she'd been listening. I'm not giving you back, he said softly. Her eyes, wide, unreadable, held his for a moment. Then she whispered, Bran said you wouldn't. Elijah didn't know how she meant that, not literally. But in that cabin, with the fire hissing and the storm returning in whispers through the trees, it felt like a vow had been exchanged, one not written in ink, but in the scars they all carried. The wind slammed against the cabin walls like fists, demanding entry. Inside, the silence after Vivian's final words lingered, thick as ash. Elijah hadn't moved from the doorway. His hands still clutched the folder, though he wasn't looking at it anymore. His eyes were locked on the woman retreating across the snowy yard. Each of her steps calculated, precise. The kind of walk a person has when they think the conversation is over. But it wasn't. Vivian turned back halfway down the trail. I forgot my bag, she called softly, almost like an afterthought. Elijah didn't answer. She ascended the porch again, slow and calm. Echo bristled from behind the wood stove. Bran, who had been curled beside Lena, rose like a shadow unfolding. Not barking, not pacing, just still and watching. Vivian stepped through the door, scanning the room like she had every right to be there. It has some personal items, she said, eyes drifting toward the armchair near the fire. Elijah's voice was flat. Leave it. I'd rather not, she replied, polite, but clipped. She moved toward it. Bran moved faster. The growl that erupted from his throat was low, guttural, like something torn from the chest of an animal who had once known cages and swore never to return. Back, Elijah ordered instinctively. But Bran didn't listen. Vivian had reached for the handle of her bag, fingers just brushing the zipper, when Bran lunged, not to bite, but to block. His body collided with her legs, sending her stumbling backward. The bag flew from her hands, tumbling across the floor. The zipper burst open on impact. From inside, several small objects spilled out. A slim notepad, a pair of latex gloves, a half-eaten protein bar, and a USB drive. It skidded beneath the table, landing near Lena's boot. Elijah moved first. He didn't need to speak. His training had kicked in the moment the drive hit the wood. Bran held his position between Vivian and the girl. One detail, a white label affixed hastily to one side. EGI Intake Protocols, Tier Alpha. A tremor passed through Elijah's hand, not from fear, from rage. "You weren't here to evaluate her," he said softly, standing. Vivian's silence was answer enough. "You were here to silence loose ends." Her eyes narrowed. "You don't understand what this is." "No," he said, "but I understand what it's not." He moved to the cabinet above the wood stove, opened the false panel, and pulled out a pistol, not aiming it, just letting her see he had remembered who he was, long before she walked in. "You should go." Vivian took a breath, glanced at the dogs, then at Lena, who hadn't moved, just stared at her with those hollow eyes that had seen too much too soon. And then Vivian did something unexpected. She laughed. Not loud, just one breath, sharp and bitter. "You think they'll let you keep her?" she asked. "You're out here with a name they already flagged 5 years ago. You're dead weight to them. A memory." Elijah's face didn't flinch. "Then they'll regret not burying knee deeper." Vivian backed toward the door, one step at a time. Echo moved to stand beside Bran, forming a silent barricade of fur, breath, and loyalty. Vivian stepped out into the snow, the wind swallowing the last of her scent as the door closed behind her. Elijah locked it, then deadbolted it, then shoved a chair beneath the handle. The quiet after her exit was broken only by the crackling of the fire and Bran's heaving breath. He turned to Lena. "You okay?" She nodded once. Elijah opened the laptop near the fire, slid the USB drive into the port, and waited for the screen to load. Encrypted, of course. But the file name glared back at him in bold black text. Intake_A17/EGSID/video_doc. He snapped the laptop shut. Not here. Not yet. He looked over his shoulder. "Echo," he said, and the dog turned. "Guard her." Then he stepped into the small side room and grabbed the old satellite phone, one of the few things he'd kept from Afghanistan that still worked. He punched in a number he hadn't used in 3 years. 2 rings. Then a voice. Female, clipped, cautious. "This line better be cold." "It's Elijah." A pause, a longer breath. "Elijah Ward? What the fear?" But from purpose. Bran returned to Lena's side. Echo moved to the door again, ears up. Elijah stared out at the falling snow. They'd drawn blood today, not with teeth, but truth, and truth had a scent. The storm had quieted, but the silence outside was no comfort. Snow clung to the window panes like a warning written in white. Inside the cabin, everything had shifted. The air, the pacing, the very way light moved across the floor. The moment that USB drive hit the wood, Elijah knew. The cabin was no longer safe. It was now a target. They needed a second plan. They needed to disappear. Elijah stood in the center of the living room, his voice low but firm, speaking not just to Lena, but to the two dogs who had become more than guardians. They were the walls between life and whatever hunted them. "Get your boots," he told Lena gently. "We're going outside." Her eyes flicked to the door, nervous. "It's okay," he said, kneeling. "Just behind the cabin. Somewhere only I know. And now you will too." Bran stood up instantly. Echo followed, tail lowered but alert. They sensed it wasn't a walk, it was a mission. Elijah led them around the side of the cabin, through fresh snow dusted over hardened drifts. He paused near an old pine tree, half hollow, scarred by time. He knelt beside a pile of stones that looked like nothing, just runoff from the mountain's edge, until his gloved hand found the iron ring beneath. With a grunt he pulled up. Snow and soil gave way to a steel door embedded in earth, painted the dull color of rock, invisible unless you already knew. A keypad blinked faintly red, then green, as Elijah tapped a short code with muscle memory. He pushed it open. A ladder descended into dark. "This is the bunker," he said. "Built it myself after I got back. Figured the war didn't end just because I came home." He dropped in first. The walls were close, the air cold and dry. But the space below was solid, a concrete tube leading to a larger room, reinforced with steel beams and storage shelves. No windows. A vented propane heater hummed in the corner. Batteries, water, radio, maps, ammunition. "Not cozy," Elijah admitted, "but it'll keep you breathing when nowhere else will." Lena dropped in next, Bran landing behind her like a shadow made flesh. Echo brought up the rear. The girl looked around, eyes wide. Then, slowly, she nodded. She understood. Elijah handed her a rolled-up sheet of paper and spread it across the dusty table. It was a diagram, the full escape route from the cabin to a forest trail 2 miles east, accessible through the tunnel branching from the bunker's rear wall. "If something happens," he said, pointing, "you grab this bag, here, and follow Bran. Stopwatch in hand." "Ready?" he called. Lena nodded. "Go." Bran moved first, clearing the opening. Lena followed, landing soft on her feet like she'd done it all her life. Echo flowed behind, silent and fluid. She ran the length of the tunnel, turned left at the mark, paused at the red ribbon tied to a beam, memorized it, then moved to the next station, a water cache. Then another mark, yellow, where she'd wait if separated. By the time she reached the exit point, a camouflaged hatch beneath a collapsed tree trunk, she was panting but calm. Elijah met her there, impressed. "You learn fast," he said, breathing visible in the frigid air. She didn't smile, but her eyes held a flicker of pride. It was the first warmth he'd seen in her since the night she arrived. They ran it again and again. By the 5th drill, Lena moved with the same rhythm as the dogs. Precise, alert, one eye on Bran, one hand always brushing Echo's flank. She trusted them in a way no adult could ever earn. Later, back in the cabin, she sat beside the fire, sipping from a thermos Elijah handed her. "Do you remember the first time you felt safe?" he asked gently. She didn't answer, but she reached over and touched Bran's fur. That was enough. Elijah stood, feeling the weight of the room settle over him. He walked to the table, unrolled the diagram again, this time adding red marks to the map. 3 possible intrusion paths, 2 fallback positions, one final standpoint, the cabin itself. He didn't want it to come to that. But if it did, they would be ready. Bran lay by the door now, ears twitching with every creak. Echo dozed lightly by the fire, eyes never fully closed. Lena had curled under a blanket, boots still on, like part of her didn't believe sleep was safe yet. Elijah sat across the room, watching flames eat wood slowly, steadily. He remembered Kandahar, the drills, the evac routes, the breathless adrenaline of knowing that if you fumbled even one step, someone didn't make it. Now he was running those drills with a 6-year-old girl and 2 retired canines in a snowbound cabin in Maine. But the principle was the same. Protect the asset, secure the path, and never, ever let them be taken again. The wind moved like a low breath through the pines, steady, cold, but no longer aimless. Bran lifted his head first. Echo stood, ears flicking toward the trees, chapped lips. "Miss me?" Bran didn't bark. Echo didn't growl. They both stepped forward, not as threat, but as confirmation. She was one of them. Elijah moved fast, taking her by the arm as she stumbled onto the porch. He saw the blood on her sock before she even mentioned it. "You were followed?" "Briefly," Renee said, teeth clenched. "Took them through a frozen creek, lost the trail near Ridge Hollow. They won't risk dogs in this cold." He ushered her inside. Lena had risen already, standing behind the wood stove like a shadow. She said nothing, just stared as Bran positioned himself protectively between her and the stranger. "It's all right," Elijah told her. "This is Renee. She's a friend." Lena didn't move, but her hand found Bran's neck, and she held on. Renee lowered herself to the table with a grimace, tossing off her wet glove and pulling a flash drive from an inner pocket, the same one Bran had knocked from Vivian's bag. "Let's see if your dog was right to growl," she muttered. Elijah booted up the solar-powered laptop in the corner, patched together from spare parts and paranoia. A soft chime, a flash of blue screen, and then silence. They waited. The USB loaded slowly, humming into life, and then it opened. What poured onto the screen wasn't a list, it was a wound. Names, dozens of them, child intake records, medical logs with coded diagnosis notes, photos with digital timestamps blurred but still visible, file after file marked with initials, EGI. Embedded in the metadata were connections to companies Elijah had never heard of, but Renee had. She clicked faster now, sweat beating at her temple despite the cold. "There," she said, pointing. "Look at that Shell account, tied to a funding pool used in 2 congressional campaigns. Here, Hope Future Foundation, listed as the humanitarian partner. Jesus, Elijah. This isn't a rogue group, it's sanitized, legalized." He leaned in. One file was titled Tier Alpha Protocols, Site Rotation. Inside were photos of facility layouts, bland, sterile spaces designed like boarding schools, but with biometric locks. One location matched a town just 80 miles south. Another was crossed out. Status: cleared. Next rotation, TBA. "They're rotating them," Renee said. "Like cattle, new sites every quarter, new names, same hands." Lena approached slowly, eyes locked on the screen. She pointed to a blurry image in one file, a group photo with smiling staff and several children in matching blue sweaters. "That's them," she whispered. "The smiling people." Her voice cracked like it hurt to let sound pass. Renee turned to her, eyes suddenly softer. "And you made it out," she said. "That's why they're panicking." "Accounts across Europe and the Middle East. "This isn't just abuse," he muttered. "This is a system." He scrolled again. One file caught his breath. A lab report, child ID, subject 47-A. Sensitive response to canine proximity. Observed neurological pairing with dual canine units B17 and B18. Bran and Echo, the words blurred. Renee sat back. They weren't just watching her, they were experimenting with her, conditioning her responses to the dogs. They weaponized her trust, Elijah said quietly. They turned love into a control mechanism. Outside, a raven croaked once in the trees. Inside, no one moved. Lena stood silently, not looking at the screen anymore. Her hand rested on Echo now, and her thumb stroked his fur like she was grounding herself. Maybe she didn't understand all the words, but she understood the weight. Bran growled, a low, deep sound, not directed at the room, but at something beyond the walls. Elijah stood. "We need to prepare," he said. "They'll come faster now. We took too much from them." Renee nodded, already pulling gauze from her bag to wrap her ankle tighter. "We don't have long, but we do have this." She held up the USB again. "Evidence." Elijah looked at the two dogs. Bran's ears were rigid, focused. Echo was already pacing. Lena turned to Elijah then, her eyes wide, her voice steady. "Will they burn us too?" The question gutted him. He walked over, knelt down beside her. "No," he said, "not if I'm breathing." Then he glanced at the screen, at the files that now felt radioactive in his hands. "Not while we're all still standing." The storm outside had tapered to a whisper of snowflakes, soft and deceitful, like a lull before something worse. Inside the cabin, the fire cracked low, casting flickers of orange light across maps, photos, and the laptop screen. Lena had fallen asleep, curled against Echo, her hand still clutched in the dog's thick ruff. Her breathing was slow but uneasy. Bran lay close to the door, half awake, nose twitching with every shift of the wind. Renee and Elijah sat at the table again, backs hunched, the air between them laced with fatigue and disbelief. On the screen was a name that hadn't appeared before, not in any of the files or headlines, but in the whisper of a child's sleep. "Greaves," Renee repeated softly, fingers poised over the keyboard. Abbreviated in internal documentation as EGI. The logo blinked on the screen, a stylized olive branch encircling the globe. "Peace through order." That was the motto. Renee scowled. "That's what it stands for? Iran Global Initiative? You know what Iran means in Greek?" Elijah didn't answer. "Peace," she said bitterly, "but the old kind, the kind you enforced through silence." She opened a deeper folder, buried under password lock encryption that the USB's metadata had flagged. Elijah leaned forward as she cracked it. Inside were deployment charts, facility blueprints, movement schedules of youth transfers coded with letters and dates. Each facility had a name like a summer camp. Horizon West, Colorado. Beacon House, Haiti. Starlight Grove, Poland. Elijah's voice turned cold. "They're global." "And not just that," Renee added, pulling up a cross-reference file. "These facilities are linked to contractors, private security firms, most of them shell companies, You ever heard of Paragon Tactical Solutions? Elijah nodded slowly. They worked a few bases in Helmand Province, mostly recon logistics and canine coordination. We always thought they were just ghosts. They're on payroll for EGI, Renee said. Dogs included. She clicked again, pulling up a redacted shipping manifest out of Warsaw. A crate marked medical equipment, but coded under a canine behavioral transfer program. Those weren't dogs for therapy, she said, nearly to herself. They were programming them. Elijah stood and began to pace. Something wasn't fitting, and then suddenly it did. All those times Lena refused to speak, unless the dogs were fed first. The way she looks at Echo before she answers a question, it's not instinct. It's conditioning, Renee said grimly. They trained her with them, or used the dogs to create a feedback loop, emotional dependency, psychological triggers. That's why she's not afraid of them, even when Bran growls. She was raised alongside them. The room fell quiet, except for the soft tapping of snow against the window panes. Renee opened one final file, a personnel directory. Among the names and credentialed faces was one that caught Elijah's breath. Vivian Kane, Director of Psychological Adaptation, Tier Alpha. Underneath was her CV, pristine, padded with academic papers on interspecies emotional imprinting. One article was titled, "The Neural Trust Reflex, Conditioning Emotional Anchors in Pediatric Subjects." He stepped back. She was never a handler, Elijah said. She was an architect. Renee's voice dropped. And she's just one cog. Swallowed. Yeah, we did. She came closer. Echo rose but didn't bark. Her tiny hand brushed Elijah's coat sleeve. They made us play games, she said. But the rules always changed. If you forgot, they gave you the quiet room. Or they took someone's dog away. They said we had to learn how to follow without needing words. Renee stared at her. Did Senator Greaves come to your facility? Lena's gaze dropped. Her shoulders stiffened. They said he brought the money. He liked watching the shows, especially when we did drills with the dogs. Elijah sat beside her, his voice low. Drills? She nodded. They gave us masks, told us to walk through mazes. If we stopped or talked or cried, the dogs would bark until the lights went out. But Bran never barked. He stayed quiet. She reached down and gripped Bran's collar like a lifeline. He chose me. Elijah felt something twist in his chest. He'd seen indoctrination before, in war zones, in child soldiers, in the broken eyes of those who'd been turned into tools. But this was something deeper, sanitized, legal, funded. The trap was not just tight, it was made to look like salvation. He turned to Renee. How many names on that list? Too many, she said, and only 3 of us now know they exist. Elijah looked at the door, at the frost creeping up the windows like fingers trying to get in. They'll come again, he said. They always do, Renee replied. But this time, Elijah thought, they wouldn't just come for cleanup, they'd come to erase, and he wasn't going to let them. Not while Lena still had a voice, not while Bran and Echo still stood between innocence and silence, and not while his hands still remembered how to fight. The wind never truly stopped in these woods. It whispered in branches, tugged at window panes, curled beneath door frames as if searching for weakness. Elijah hadn't slept in 36 hours. Not fully, not honestly. He sat by the window with a thermal scope resting in his lap, its lens fogged with breath and waiting. Outside, the tree line remained still, but it was the kind of stillness he'd learned to mistrust. He'd seen it before, long ago, in places where quiet was just the drumbeat before an ambush. Behind him, the fire crackled low. Lena lay curled in a sleeping bag next to Echo, one hand nestled into the fur behind the dog's ear. Bran rested against the cabin door, awake but unmoving, chest rising in patient rhythm. Elijah's body screamed for rest, but his mind was sharpening. Sleep wasn't survival, readiness was. At first light he woke Lena with a hand on her shoulder, gentle, not startling. "You up for a lesson?" he asked, voice quiet but clear. She blinked groggily, then nodded. They dressed in silence. Echo padded beside them as they stepped out into the snow-laced clearing. Bran stayed behind, guarding. Elijah crouched near the frost-patched earth, fingers brushing over a faint depression in the pine needle bed. "See that?" he whispered. Lena leaned in. "A foot?" "Boot," he corrected. "Size 10. Treads light. Either cautious or trained. Could be 3 days old. Could be yesterday, if the ground stayed frozen." She narrowed her eyes, lips pressed. "They came close." He nodded, but didn't stay. Probably recon. Still watching. They moved on. He taught her how to spot snapped twigs that didn't belong to deer, how to see the unnatural shape of boot edges beside squirrel tracks. She picked it up fast, uncannily fast. He suspected she'd been trained in something like this before, but in darker ways. "Why are you teaching me?" she asked quietly as they stopped near a low ridge. He met her eyes. "Because one day," Elijah said, "I might not be around, and you need to know how to get out." She didn't flinch, just nodded once. That was the first sign. She was no longer hoping for rescue. She was preparing for survival. Back at the cabin, Bran's ears flicked as they returned. He rose to greet them with a low whine, then moved toward Lena's coat, and paused. His nose twitched. Elijah noticed it too. The dog sniffed again, more urgently this time, moving along the hem of her left sleeve. His tail stiffened. A growl, soft and deliberate, hummed in his throat. Elijah took the coat gently, brought it to his own nose, faint but sharp, like rotting oranges laced with plastic. "Citrus," he murmured. "That's an old scent-tagging method, synthetic linalool." "Is it poison?" Lena asked. "No. Worse," Elijah said. "It's how they track airborne markers. Dogs trained to follow this can sniff it for miles." He looked at Bran. "And you still caught it?" The dog gave a low huff. Lena's face tightened with guilt. "They sprayed it when we were sleeping, on our blankets, our clothes. Said it helped locate us quickly in case of emergencies." Elijah's hands clenched. "It wasn't for emergencies." She nodded. "It was in case we ran." He went outside and burned the coat immediately. Echo stood watch beside Lena while she brushed Bran's thick fur in slow, methodical strokes. The tension between them was unspoken, but mutual. Something had changed. Something had been revealed. When the wind shifted and night began to fall, Elijah sealed every crack in the windows with thick blankets and salt lines. Not because he believed in superstition, but because he knew some enemy there. A warm presence, a pulse, a steady breath beside her ribs. The dog pressed close, nuzzling into her arm until her muscles stopped trembling. "I dreamed they came back," Lena whispered into the darkness. "But this time Bran was gone, and you didn't know me." Echo exhaled through her nose, a sound like understanding. "I don't want to forget who I am," she said. From his cot by the door, Elijah heard everything, but he didn't interrupt. Sometimes children only spoke truths when they believed no adult was listening. He closed his eyes just for a moment, not to sleep, but to remember the last time he felt this slow, careful re-knitting of something broken. Trust didn't happen in speeches. It came in watches kept beside windows, in maps traced into snow, in the silence of nightmares shared with dogs. In sleeplessness, a new family was forming, not by blood, not by choice, but by fire, fear, and the need to keep moving. They would come soon, but tonight she slept without screaming. And that was enough. It was just after dawn when Renee Alvarez returned from the ridge. Her breath came in short bursts, fogging the cold air, and her limp was more pronounced than the night before. Elijah spotted her silhouette through the tree line before the dogs did, but Bran was first to growl. He never trusted easily, not even with those who'd bled beside Elijah. "She's alone," Elijah said, still watching through the scope. "But something's wrong." By the time Renee reached the cabin, Echo was already pacing the porch, tail stiff and ears pinned. Renee didn't wait to be let in. She pulled open the door with urgency, snow crusted on her boots, her cheeks raw from wind. She didn't speak right away, just unzipped her parka and dropped it by the fire, revealing the pistol, holstered tight against her ribs, and the shake in her hands. "You're being hunted," she said without ceremony. "And not just by Hope Future operatives. Someone in my unit back-channeled this location to an unknown contact 3 days ago." Elijah closed the cabin door with more force than necessary. "Who? I don't know yet, but whoever it was used internal clearance, logged in through Langley servers using an old Afghanistan callback key." "That's yours," he said quietly. "I know," her voice cracked, "but it wasn't me. Someone cloned my token. Someone inside." Lena, crouched behind the stove with Bran half in front of her, watched Renee with a child's quiet fear, the kind of stillness that doesn't come from shyness but survival instinct. "They'll send someone," Elijah said. "Soon." Renee nodded. "Could be a cleanup crew, could be a fake extraction, could be worse." By midday, they were dismantling every piece of tech in the cabin, phones, flash drives, even Renee's satellite radio. Elijah dropped Snake as it died. No more signals, not even static. "We can't call for help now," Renee murmured. "Exactly," Elijah said. "Help might be the ones pulling the trigger." He retrieved a canvas pouch from under the floorboards. Inside were river stones, each painted with cryptic symbols, trail code from his recon days. Not GPS, not digital, just memory and instinct. "What are those?" Lena asked from across the room. "Signal stones," Elijah said. "They mark routes through the woods, safe, unsafe fallback paths. A language no one tracks unless they would train for it. I'm going to lay them out today. If we have to run, you'll follow what I show you." Lena stepped closer. "Like breadcrumbs?" He smiled faintly. "Smarter than breadcrumbs. These don't disappear in rain or snow. And Echo knows how to read them, too." Outside, the air hung heavy. Snow hadn't fallen yet, but the cold had a warning in it. The pines stood tall like silent witnesses, each needle dusted with frost. Elijah moved fast, hiking alone between ridges and creeks, laying stones beneath hollow logs and carving subtle arrows into bark with the edge of his boot knife. Each mark pointed to a new contingency. Trail to the creek bunker, detour to the rusted fire tower, fallback to the ravine overlook. His body moved automatically, but his mind ran hot. Someone inside the system had sold them out. Someone Renee trusted. And if Hope Future had half the infrastructure she claimed, then this wasn't just about a lost child anymore. It was about evidence. It was about silence. Back in the cabin, Renee scanned the decrypted files from the USB again. Now using a non-networked laptop she'd taken apart and reassembled from spare parts. It was slow, painful, but the files were damning. "EGI doesn't just operate domestically," she muttered. "They've got partnerships in Poland, Haiti, Sierra Leone, and at least 2 dark labs near the Colorado-Utah border. This isn't just trafficking. This is child control infrastructure. Lena, seated beside Echo, didn't look surprised. I knew we were in different places, she said. Some of the kids spoke different languages. One girl had a number tattoo, like mine but with a blue border. Renee stilled. You remember her number? A42-BL. Her name was Samira. Renee typed quickly. Elijah returned as dusk fell, his boots wet, eyes sharp. Markers are set, he said. If we have to go dark, we can vanish for a week. Let's hope we don't need that long, Renee replied. But even as she said it, Bran stood and moved to the door. He didn't growl, he just listened. That night the fire burned low again and none of them slept. Lena, they're afraid. Renee stood near the window, peering into the woods through binoculars. I don't know who I trust anymore, she said softly. You don't need to, Elijah replied. Just know who you protect. She turned to him. And who do you protect? His answer was slow, but true. The ones who still have a chance to be children. It was a silence thick and full. And then, somewhere in the dark, Bran let out a single low growl. Elijah stood. Reinforcements, he whispered. Renee tightened her grip on her weapon. Or rats. The sound of tires on packed snow was so faint it could have been mistaken for wind, but Bran heard it first. The German shepherd rose from his place near the hearth without a growl, just stillness, a tension in his frame that made the air in the cabin snap tight. His ears perked, head low, tail rigid. Echo followed but didn't bark. She merely crept to the door, her breath fogging the frosted glass as she stared into the pines. Elijah set down his tin cup, steam still curling from the black coffee inside, and moved to the side window. He didn't touch the curtain, just narrowed his eyes at the tree line. 300 yards down the ridge, half veiled by fir branches, something unnatural disrupted the frozen silence. Black, square-bodied, idle, a vehicle. No movement, no headlights, no sound beyond the occasional tick of cooling metal. Elijah grabbed the scope from the wall and crouched beside the sill. The magnification cut through the trees like a scalpel. What he saw chilled more than the snow. A black SUV. No plates, all windows tinted. Still running. No one exited. No logo. No snow on the roof. It hadn't been there long. Tires clean, likely all-terrain military grade. The kind used by tactical units that never officially existed. And it was parked exactly 1.1 miles from the cabin. Far enough to avoid casual detection, close enough for line-of-sight surveillance. Eyes on us, Elijah muttered. Renee crossed the room and crouched beside him. She didn't need the scope. I know that model, she said. I used to brief drivers who ran them, built for silent approach, heat-dampening exhaust, satellite uplinks. Gov issued? Private contractors, she replied. The kind who don't wear badges or answer questions. Bran let out a soft rumble. Echo whined and pressed closer to Lena, who sat curled under the window bench, fingers white around the neck of her sketchbook. She didn't cry, but her face had that hollow look again, like she was retreating somewhere deep inside herself. They won't come in yet, she said quietly. Elijah turned to her. What do you mean? They're watching us, logging everything. Wait to say the best cages don't have locks. Just fear and cameras. Renee swallowed hard. Elijah rose and began locking down the cabin, not with bolts. Those could be broken. But with rhythms. Lights off in specific rooms. Window angles set for defense. Back doors quietly reinforced. He handed Renee a chalk marker. Signal points? She nodded. I'll run patterns. They marked the floor. Silent lines by each threshold. Emergency cues. If one of them broke the line without signaling, the others would know. They were under siege. The hours stretched. Night fell again. The SUV didn't move. Every so often, Elijah checked the scope. Still no one exited. Still no threat announced. Just presence. A slow, suffocating pressure that whispered, "We see you." At one point, Elijah caught Bran staring, not at the SUV, but at the far edge of the forest behind it. His ears twitched, then his eyes flicked to the opposite side. That's when Elijah understood. The SUV wasn't the threat. It was the bait. "Eyes front," he whispered to Renee. "But pressure's flanking us." "You sure?" "Bran is." Renee moved her hand closer to her holster. Inside the cabin, Lena spoke again. "They'll wait until just before dawn. That's when the environmental rescues happen." "Rescues?" Elijah asked. "They call it that. It's when they disappear kids under the cover of a fake disaster. Avalanche, power outage, cabin collapse." Her words were slow, methodical, memorized. "How many times have you seen that?" "Enough," she whispered. But it never worked on Echo and Bran. At 2:37 a.m., Echo growled. Short, clipped. Bran shifted to the west window. A branch snapped outside. Deliberate. Elijah flipped the safety off his rifle. He didn't aim, just stood. Back to the fire, face to the dark, and waited. "Come out and say it," he muttered under his breath. "Or leave." Nothing came. No voice, no breach. Just that quiet, stalking tension that builds when predators decide they've earned the upper hand. Bran sat down, not out of relaxation, but calculation. Waiting. Elijah moved back to Lena. "We'll be okay," he said gently. "We're not moving. That's what they want. For us to panic. Run inside, as if to remember what safe felt like." A woman's voice called out, "Hello? North Light Child Welfare Coalition. I'm here for a missing child. Is there a girl named Lena here?" Elijah froze at the mispronunciation. Lena. Too soft. Not how Lena had ever said it. Bran growled, low but certain. Elijah turned to Lena. "Do you know her?" She shook her head, then added, quietly, "They always come in twos. One talks, one waits." Elijah retrieved a flare gun and opened the door. The woman on the porch wore a cream coat, no snow on her shoulders, no flush in her cheeks, too clean for this cold. Her badge said, "Dr. Marion Sorrell, Child Trauma Division." Elijah didn't take it. "I didn't call anyone." "Neighbors do. We have protocols. I just need to check on the girl. No one here by that name." She flinched at Bran's bark. "Do you mind if I step in?" Still calm, Elijah replied, "You're not walking in here today. You're interfering with a federal case. No partner, no warrant, and you got the name wrong." Her smile vanished. "You think you're helping her, but you don't know what she's carrying." Elijah's voice dropped. "Neither do you." She turned and walked back into the woods, too quietly for someone from child protection. Inside, Renee had emerged from the crawl space. She botched it. On purpose? Could be, Renee said. Some want us to suspect, make us flinch. Elijah crouched beside Lena. You did good. She smelled like metal, and roses, but not real ones. Outside, snow fell, gentle, deceitful. Then, smoke. A thin column rising from the eastern ridge. Elijah stood on the porch, watching. Bran growled. Echo shifted. They're pulling us east, Elijah said. But it's a trick. Renee nodded. Dead trail, since the rockfall. He turned toward the west, the blind spot, the old silo. No satellite coverage, no sensors. They're flanking. Push and collapse. Renee's voice dropped. Then we're in the box. Inside, Lena was already layering up. Echo by her side. Bran pacing. New rule, Elijah said. We don't follow smoke. We follow instinct. You're going to the bunker. You remember the drill? She nodded. 3 turns. Echo first. Bran last. Close hatch after 20. And if I whistle twice, I run. And if I don't whistle, you don't come back for me. Her voice was steady. It hurt more. Ridge. 3rd tree. Tracks. 2 sets. Trained. Staggered. Inside the perimeter already. Renee, he whispered into the mic. Confirm visual on smoke? Still rising. No one near it. Decoy confirmed. West has movement. Lockdown. Light the fallback. Back in the cabin, Renee triggered the failsafe. Phosphor flares, flashbangs, 1 expired tear gas canister labeled ghost repellent. Just in case. In the tunnel, Lena counted to 20. Echo led, Bran behind. At 20, she closed the hatch. Darkness swallowed them. Elijah saw them now. 2 men. One with a signal jammer, one with a dart rifle. Capture, not kill. They want her alive, Elijah muttered. Good. He took aim. 1 shot. Screams. Then real fire behind them, not a distraction. This one burned to make a point. Just past midnight, the wind shifted. Echo stirred first. She had been asleep, then still, alert. Elijah followed her gaze. The back door. He rose slowly, rifle raised. The door creaked. Echo lunged, trained, silent, precise. She slammed into the intruder, locking her jaws on his forearm. He crashed into the wall. A silenced sidearm clattered to the floor. Elijah moved. Echo down. She obeyed. Elijah zip-tied the man's hands. Renee arrived with her rifle. Who is he? She asked. No ID, no badge, just black armor, a throat mic, and a missing insignia patch. A blinking light near the floorboard caught Elijah's eye. A microbeacon. Not from inside, brought in. Tracking them. Who sent you? Elijah growled. No answer. Renee murmured. Private contractor. I've seen him before. Elijah yanked the mask down. The man stared at Echo, then toward the hidden stairwell. He knew. He hadn't come for Elijah. He'd come for her. You don't understand what she is, the man finally said. This isn't protection. It's containment. Renee jabbed the rifle into his ribs. Contain this. He coughed, didn't speak again. Elijah turned. We secure him, then move to second ring. You think he's the only one? No, Elijah said. He's just the first. He knelt beside Echo, whispered something. She licked his hand, then disappeared into the tunnel. The storm had begun. No sirens, no alarms, just cold and fangs. The wind too polished to be freelance. He glanced at the boots, clean, Vibram soles, custom-cut laces. So who are you? No one gives orders in cartographer, the man replied. We respond to maps. Maps? Renee asked. Behavior patterns, risk matrices. You lit up enough flags to become a flare. You weren't tracking the girl, Elijah realized. We were tracking you. Silence settled like snowfall. Renee stepped closer, a blade in hand. You've seen Tier Alpha protocols. The man's smile faded. Then why was your beacon synced to a Tier Alpha intake drive? No answer. You followed a child through snow, Elijah said. No ID, no warning. That wasn't containment, that was a kill order. The man exhaled. You think this ends at your cabin? You're going to talk, Elijah said. You're going to help us end it. The man leaned forward. They call it Project Cartographer because we redraw boundaries. People become coordinates, assets, until they're liabilities. Extraction doesn't mean rescue. It means erasure. Elijah's stomach turned. Lena? She was never meant to survive past stage 3, but she ran. And when she ran, the dogs went too. That broke the chain. Irene Global? Renee asked. Not officially. Cartographers buried inside their humanitarian wing. You think those vaccine labs are what they claim? Elijah closed his eyes. Burned coats. Henry's name. Lena's silence. He turned back. Who runs it? I don't know. We're cell-based. Names. Vectors. Never the full map. Then give us what you do know. Red Lake Range, 7 miles east. Midnight airlift, if retrieval succeeds. Signal code, Delta Echo 3. Renee wrote it down. Elijah gave the man one nod. You're going to sleep now. Echo padded forward, pressed her snout to the man's neck, one precise motion. He slumped, breathing, sedated. Bran sat beside him, ever watchful. Renee looked to Elijah. We have a window, a location, and a code. And now, Elijah said, we have a choice. Her hand hovered over her holster. Bait them? He looked toward the hatch. No, we end it. The decryptor hummed like a soft warning in the cabin's silence. Outside, the woods were still. Inside, Renee's screen glowed with stolen data. I'm in, she whispered. Elijah leaned in as she opened a buried folder. Tier Alpha, adaptation logs. She clicked. Intake, PC, users. Enhancement folders, cohort, A. Sterilization, odd, 345C. Canine, bonding, trials. Elijah's breath hitched. These weren't random adoptions, Renee said. They were selections, vulnerable kids with elastic psyches, ones they thought wouldn't be missed. Elijah pointed. Open the empathy enhancer trials. Video loaded. A girl, maybe 9, sat on a white floor, arms crossed. Then, a German Shepherd pup entered the room. Day 1. No response. Dog mimics sleeping position. Day 2. First words in 11 months spoken to dog. Day 5. Heart rate stabilized via canine presence. Conclusion. Early bonding increases compliance and dissociation override. Renee read aloud a note beneath a photo. If they bond early, they'll never question who holds the leash. Lena's fingers gripped the stair rail. Echo leaned against her, as if remembering that sterile room too. These weren't pets, Elijah whispered. They were designed for control. Renee pulled up another map. Pins in Puerto Rico, Sweden, Poland, Arizona. All Irene-run clinics, each one a test loop. She clicked one outside Flagstaff. Subject 3, nonverbal onset after maternal overdose, strong symbolic tracking. Elijah frowned. They trained her to map? She wasn't just escaping, Renee said. She was memorizing every step. Echo lay against Lena's lap. Bran moved to the window, a low growl. She's not a witness, Renee whispered. She's the anomaly, the one they didn't predict. Elijah stood. Back up the data. We go dark by dawn. You're planning something. I'm done reacting. From above, Lena's voice cut the room. They take children. Elijah met her eyes. Then we take something back. Later that night, Elijah sat with a map of northern Arizona. Bran near the door, Echo nearby. Lena appeared on the stairs, wrapped in Bran's old blanket. They were going to kill them, she said. The man with the gray eyes tried to stop it. Elijah turned. They tied him to a chair, made us watch. Bran growled when they hit him. The man said, "Don't touch my dog." And Echo? She was meant to bond with a boy, Subject 9. He didn't make it. They tagged her cage for termination. She drew the mark in the air, a red square, slashed diagonal. Echo moved to her side. They weren't assigned to me, Lena said. They chose me. Elijah's throat closed. These dogs didn't escort her out. They fled with her, saved her, because one dying handler opened the gate. These dogs remember everything, Elijah said. And they still came back, Lena whispered. He knelt beside Bran. Rescue mission anymore. Everyone turned. He looked at Bran, at Echo, at Lena. This is a reckoning. Outside, the snow had stopped falling, but inside, the storm had already begun. The snow had begun to melt, exposing damp earth beneath. Morning had barely touched the treetops when a black SUV pulled up the gravel path. Not fast, not stealthy, just inevitable. Bran growled first, low, steady, like memory surfacing. Echo stood at the door, unmoving. Her eyes tracked the woman who stepped out, Scarlett Morrison. 10 years had passed, but Elijah said her name like it never left his mouth. "Ma'am," he greeted. She didn't smile, but her voice had the old, polished warmth. "Heard you were living like a ghost. Had to see it myself." Scarlett's gaze swept the yard, the girl at the window, the dogs, the training poles half buried in snow. She didn't linger, but Lena saw the calculation. "What do you want?" Elijah asked. She held out a manila envelope. "Federal oversight. We tracked one of cartographer's freelancers to your location. That agent you put down? Not from here." "No," Elijah said. Scarlett's voice lowered. "You're in a mess no one wants in daylight. I'm here to get you out. Witness protection, immunity, relocation for the girl." Bran bared his teeth. "She's lying," Lena whispered. Scarlett's eyes landed on the child, studying her. "You're not welcome here," Elijah said. "They'll be coming," Scarlett replied. "What they're building now doesn't need handlers, just chemical obedience, drones, wireless correction implants." Bran stepped in front of Elijah. Echo moved closer to Lena. "They're watching me too," Scarlett said. You have 48 hours before they bury this place." She handed him the envelope. He didn't take it. "Are you with them?" he asked. "I'm with what's left of my conscience," she said. "It's not much, but it's yours if you want it." She walked away without looking back. Only when the forest swallowed her SUV did Elijah open the envelope, coordinates, access code, and one line in her old field handwriting, "For what we couldn't save." The next morning, Scarlett returned. She wasn't alone. A second vehicle hid along the ridge. Surveillance was silent, but present. Scarlett held a leather folio. Her voice wasn't warm now, just resigned. "Emergency custody directive," she said. "She's listed as a minor with no verified guardian. You refuse, they come in force. This is the soft option." Lena watched through the screen door, silent. Then she walked to the kitchen, pulled a red pencil, and began to draw. Bran growled. Echo tilted her head. Scarlett extended the papers again. "It's the only way she gets out clean." Elijah took the folder. Everything looked betrayed her. Lena walked forward and handed Scarlett a folded paper. A child's drawing. A woman in a black coat. A red X scratched across her face. 2 words beneath it. "She lied." Scarlett didn't speak. Her mouth moved. Maybe an apology. Or just breath. "She will again," Lena said. "They all do." Elijah stepped between them. "You want me to sell her back into their system? For what? Clean paperwork and a leash?" "She'll be safe." "No, she'll be silenced." He shoved the folder back. "She's not yours." Scarlett's voice cracked. "You can't protect her from what's coming." "I'm not trying to protect her from everything," he said. "Just from you." Scarlett didn't argue. She nodded once. Not agreement, acknowledgement. "You've got 36 hours before the flag goes wide. They'll expect you to run north." She walked away. This time, no one stopped her. Lena didn't wave. She just drew a line in the air, striking a name from a list. Dawn came gray and brittle. The forest held its breath. Then the sound. Tires. Black SUVs crawled through the mist, not sneaking, not storming, just arriving, like a verdict. Elijah stood by the tree line with Bran and Echo. Renee, injured but armed, stayed inside with Lena. Badges flashed. A woman called out, "Federal Tactical Response. We're looking for Renee Alvarez and Elijah Calloway." "That's us," Elijah said. From the third SUV, a man stepped out. Gray coat, steady eyes. "We got a call. 28 hours ago. You've been dark since." Renee limped forward. "We had reason." The man nodded. "You have something for us?" Elijah stepped forward and handed over a hardened drive. "Everything's on there. Names, medical trials, orders, coordinates." The agent glanced at Lena. "And the girl?" "She's not a subject," Elijah said. "She's a witness." The agent's face didn't change, but the moment did. From the final vehicle, a woman was escorted out, hands zip-tied. Scarlet, hair loose, coat wrinkled. Her eyes met Elijah's, not with anger, but with resignation. "They found her vehicle near the ridge," the agent said. "She was relaying through Irene's shell network. Dual routing. She bought you time." Elijah didn't speak, but Lena stood in the cabin doorway. She didn't wave, didn't hide, just drew another invisible line across the air. A final strike-through. Agents moved quickly, quietly. Statements, perimeter checks, debriefs whispered in corners. But Elijah's eyes kept drifting to Lena, and the dogs who never left her side. Bran lay at her feet. Echo pressed close to her side. Finally, the lead agent returned. "You used to build..." Didn't ask for promises. He didn't believe in them anymore. By the time the SUVs pulled away, the cabin felt heavier. Justice hadn't closed a door, it had cracked it open. And every hand reaching for the knob had a motive. As the last vehicle vanished into the trees, Elijah turned. Lena stood at the threshold. "Are we safe now?" she asked. He didn't answer. He laid a hand on Bran's shoulder. "Not yet," he said, "but the system is moving." He looked down the misted trail, and this time his voice steadied. "It knows we're watching." The gates didn't creak. They clicked, open quietly, smooth, intentional, as if the metal itself had been trained not to startle. The sign above the entrance read simply, "Lena Haven Center." No guards, no wire, just pine trees, birdsong, and the long, patient breath of a place learning how to heal. A child's laughter rang through the courtyard, not loud, not defiant, just free. Bran stood at the far edge, vest labeled K9 Security Certified, still, calm, but never not watching. His purpose now wasn't control. It was to guard the right to feel safe. Inside, Echo lay curled beside a silent boy. Every time someone walked past, his fingers gripped her fur a little tighter. She never moved. She was the anchor. In the hallway, a wall held no politician portraits, only children's drawings, crayon heroes, crooked smiles, and one sketch of a girl in a yellow scarf beside a dog, with words scrawled beneath. "He saw me first, and he stayed." In the admin wing, Elijah reviewed quiet security protocols. No cameras inside, no surveillance, only tripwires, scent markers, and behavioral mapping. He wore no uniform now, but his stance hadn't changed. He didn't protect secrets anymore. He protected lives. Renee entered, placing a folder on the desk. 4 new referrals. 1, Sophie, has the same signs. Tampered identity, suppressed voice, same shell orgs. Elijah nodded. Cartographer? "They're bleeding lawyers," Renee said. "Whistleblowers are finally cracking them open." He looked out the window. Lena sat beneath the cedar tree with a smaller girl beside her. Bran watched from behind. Lena had grown. She still flinched at loud bangs, still woke some nights in silence. But she laughed now. She walked without looking over her shoulder, and most mornings she asked if she could help the younger ones. No one asked her to. That afternoon, Lena sat in the art room, head bent over a pencil stub. Sunlight filtered in through the misted window. She didn't notice Elijah watching. She finished, rose, and placed the drawing into his hand without a word. It was the cabin, snow falling, the crooked mailbox, the chimney. A girl in a yellow scarf stood arms out, dogs beside her. When the fire came, when Bran vanished, when the snow was too fast, she paused. Then, but Echo came back. Bran forced the trapdoor open. Then you were there. I remember your voice first. It was shaking, Elijah said. But it came anyway. She smiled softly. I'm hanging this one, not because it's my best, but because it knows. Knows? What it cost, what it gave, what it means to stay. Elijah swallowed. Want to hang it together? No, she said. You. He did. On the empty spot saved for when it mattered most. When he turned, she was at the window, watching another girl learn hand signals with Echo. She doesn't sleep well, Lena said. Like you used to. She shook her head. No, with me, Echo chose first. Elijah looked at her. And you know what that means? I have to stay long enough to be someone else's first. Outside, Bran paced the edge of the property, nose to the wind, steady, unshaken. The van door creaked open in the gray morning mist. 2 children stepped out, twins. No luggage, no stuffed animals, no words. Their jackets swallowed them whole. They didn't cry. They didn't move. Until Echo arrived. She padded forward, not as a guard, but as someone who had once flinched at light. She sat, 3 feet away, still. The girl looked up, ash-colored eyes hollow. The boy stepped in front of her, shielding. Echo tilted her head. Elijah had seen it before, with Lena, in the snow. Then Echo nudged the boy's hand. He flinched, then laughed, small, shaky, but real. The girl stared at him, then let her mouth curve, just slightly, like her body remembered what a smile might feel like. This wasn't a miracle place. It didn't promise to erase what was done, but it did offer something else. The right to a name instead of a number. The right to wake without chains. The right to stay. And the quiet promise that someone, dog, girl, or man, would always be there first. From the porch, Lena watched it all unfold. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. She had been them once. She knew what it meant to stand in that in-between space, the one between fear and belonging, between silence and song. Elijah stepped beside her, coffee mug steaming in his hand. "They didn't give names," he said. "No records, just dropped off and gone before I made it down the stairs." Lena nodded. "They'll tell us eventually, or not. Either way, we'll know who they are." He looked at her. "You mean you already do?" She didn't answer, just watched as Echo slowly stood, turned, and walked toward the main entrance. The twins followed, bare feet brushing against the gravel path, now warmed by the dog's trail. Inside, bearing a trace of pine and sweat, the boy paused. He looked up. There, mounted on the pale wooden wall, was a black and white photo in a simple frame. It showed two dogs. Bran, noble and alert, seated. Echo beside him, her eyes tilted toward something outside the frame. Between them sat a girl with a yellow scarf. The photo wasn't staged, wasn't perfect, but it was true. Beneath it, in soft etching carved into the wood, were the words, "What was broken is not lost, only waiting to be found again." The boy reached for his sister's hand. This time, she didn't pull away. Later that afternoon, Elijah found the boy sitting on the steps near the courtyard. He didn't speak, just watched the younger kids play tag between the birch trees. Every now and then his hand would twitch like he wanted to join in. But his feet stayed rooted. Elijah sat beside him, resting his hands on his knees. "I used to think dogs chose us because we feed them," he said, "because we give them beds and names and warm water bowls." The boy glanced at him, just barely. "But then I met Echo," Elijah continued, "and Bran. And I realized they don't stay because of what we give. They stay because of what they see in us, even when we can't see it ourselves." The boy's brow furrowed. "She chose you, didn't she?" Elijah asked, nodding toward where Echo lay under the trees, watching them without blinking. A pause. Then a slow nod. "She's not wrong," Elijah said. The boy looked back toward the photo down the hall. He traced the air in front of him with one finger, as if redrawing it in his mind. "Did the girl in the photo draw that?" he asked quietly. "Yes," Elijah said, "on a day that felt like maybe everything would fall apart. She drew it to remind us it wouldn't." The boy swallowed. His voice, when it came again, was quieter than before. "Can I draw something, too?" Elijah smiled. "We've got a whole wall waiting." Sometimes what saves us isn't a person or a place, but the quiet presence of a dog who simply stays. German shepherds, with their unwavering loyalty and deep intuition, have a way of finding the parts of us we thought were lost. They don't need words. They just need us to show up and to stay. If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a tear, a quiet ache, Maybe it's because you've known that kind of bond. Or maybe you're searching for it now. If you're looking for a gentle way to connect